Let's go ahead. This is the scripture that we use each week. We're going to get right into the lesson on supporting pioneer pastors and missionaries. Go ahead and start it.
To the children of Israel forever.
Okay, let's begin. Let's talk about the principle of support. We are looking at absolute foundation stones of our fellowship, which is evangelism to gain conversions. That's who we are. Discipleship to train for ministry as opposed to Bible school. And then planting churches out from a local congregation. Foundational to church planting is the principle of support. And part of how we operate today is based on some of the negative experiences my father originally went through in the early part of his ministry when he was a part of the Foursquare Gospel Church. So Dad struggled in early ministry, as I've told you. He began in Wickenburg, in Victoria Island, British Columbia, in Emmett, Idaho, Eugene, Oregon, Carson, California, before Prescott. He struggled over a lack of support. Firstly, there was a lack of spiritual support. And I've been repeating this so you get this. In a denomination which has centralized training, centralized control, the moment my father told his pastors that he felt he was called to preach, their answer was, you go to Bible school. By and large, when someone goes to Bible school, being connected now to the organization, they are the ones who license you, they are the ones who send you, determine where you go. Your pastors actually no longer had an active role in your life, in your ministry. You would, of course, you liked them, you had relationship, but as far as spiritual direction, your relationship with spiritual authority was severed in some ways. The organization sent you wherever they determined best, and then you dealt with an area supervisor. There would have been an area supervisor in Idaho, in the Northwest, in Oregon, California, and so on, wherever my father was. But these were people, by and large, that my parents didn't know them. They didn't know my parents. They had never been. You are introducing yourself by phone. Maybe you meet them at convention. I'm sure they're good people and helpful, but there was no real connection. So practical support spiritually to help you build the church was non-existent, and my father felt that very much, that did not work well. So spiritual support he felt was lacking. Then financial support. The Foursquare Gospel Church, they planted churches. They did have, in early days, some level of church planting, but there was very little financial support to accomplish that. When you were sent to a new posting, the figure escapes me. I told you in one of the very early lessons when they went to Canada, the entire amount of money, it was a few $100s to move a family of, 2 adults. I think they probably had 2 kids or 3 kids by that time. Very little finances if you felt God wanted you to go to a new place. Salary, living expenses, very little finances were given for the pastor's family. My parents in early ministry, they took very small churches. They were able to survive simply because most of the existing Foursquare churches had a parsonage. A parsonage means a house was attached to the building. It was built right into the building. Us kids growing up, we played in church. That was our playground because the house was connected to the church. But that was actually the only way they could survive. If they had to pay rent, it would not have been possible for them to make it. My father was pastoring, I don't remember if this was in Idaho or in Oregon, but he was approached. The organization wanted there to be a new church in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and so they asked Dad, would you be willing to go pioneer a church? And so by that time, he had 5 kids. And so he said, I will, but he just did the math and he said, for me to go and to pioneer there, I would need, I think the number was either $105 or $115 a week. And they said no. So we want a church to be planted, but we're not willing to put any money behind it. And so my dad declined and said, it's just not possible. I can't. That's not going to work for us. That was also true for missionaries, planting churches international. It is actually very common in many denominations. If you feel that God is calling you to be a missionary, you approach the organization that you're a part of and you say, I would like to go. They say, you know, I'm sure they have a vetting process of whether or not you qualify, whether they agree. But then part of their agreement is you raise money. You want to go, you travel around, you talk to people, you ask people to donate money, and when you build up money, give it to the organization, we will distribute it to you, and then you can go. So that of course is very limiting. I would say if I had to tell every person who wants to be a missionary, sure, you can go when you raise the money. You're talking, some of our church plants can be just getting them there, getting housing, equipment, and a building. $65,000 to $100,000 is very common. Imagine that. Yeah, sure, you can go when you raise $100,000. And that's actually just to get them going. That's, you know, we usually work in 2-year increments by the time they come back for conference, so it's much more beyond that. The third area where there was a lack of support, it was simply the support to attend what we call conferences. For them, it was conventions. Pastors desperately need conference, or in Foursquare it would have been convention. It is, pastors are drained by giving out. Pastors are drained by conflicts and battles. They're under assault spiritually. They desperately need to come to conference, hear preaching, be able to talk with other pastors, get refreshed, maybe get counseling if necessary or whatever. They need that. But there was simply no system. They did not build in. They encouraged pastors to come, but they provided no finances to do so. And so that meant that my parents couldn't come to conference on numbers of occasions. Or I told you about a nice Canadian couple that let them put thousands of miles on their car. That was out of their pocket to get my parents there. Okay, now I'm giving you the background. Those are negatives: lack of spiritual support, financial support, and support to go to conference. Now in 1973, Pastor Mitchell begins planting churches, and we started sending them out. So from the beginning, my father was determined, if we are going to plant churches, he said, I do not want to repeat that. So from the beginning, he determined we are going to support them. By sending from a local church, we do not send from a central organization. In our fellowship, Disciples are made from converts in the local church, and they are sent from a local church. They might be sent out at a conference, but nonetheless, it is done. When you see announcements on the stage, if they don't say from Prescott, that means a local church is going to send that couple. And there is a much better chance of spiritual support. Our system of sending from a local church means the relationship with their pastor and their friends and family in the congregation are not severed. So that's an advantage. Their pastor knows them. So I want to go and I feel God's call. I want to pioneer. I'm going to take a church. Okay. So the pastor agrees. He knows them. He's the one who trained them. He's the one who's counseled them. He knows their ups, their downs. He's very well aware of what they need. So when they go out, because he knows them and they know him, they are much more, come on, who do you feel more confident asking for help from? Strangers or friends and or family? And so if they have a family relationship, these are spiritual sons and daughters we're sending, there's a better chance that they will be willing to ask for help and get spiritual support. See, what happens to pastors when they go out, this is why you need to pray for our pastors. When we send them out, they come under assault. The devil attacks their confidence, attacks them in many different ways. And so what happens when you are under attack, the devil messes with the pastor's head. They need help. I from time to time have guys that they've been going through hell and they finally call me months and months down the road. I'm like, why didn't you call me back then? Oh, because I was afraid, I thought you were busy, or I didn't want to bother you. This is especially true with anybody who has rejection issues. This is why I say deal with your rejection issues before you go out. Because often a mistake is, I can't call pastor because nothing good is happening. Or I can't call pastor because something bad is happening, as though I've never had any bad things happen in my life, right? Like, I'll be shocked. You mean you have problems? That's silly. But by having a connection, a family connection, there's a better, imagine if you are out in an organizational structure and you're going through hell, and then you're thinking about calling somebody that you don't even know. So you have a better chance of spiritual support by the system that we do, sending from a local church, and it's because they are family. The people we stand on stage from our congregation, they're family to us. Therefore, who do you pray for more, a stranger or family? Hopefully family. I know some of you don't like your family, but that's a different, that'll be a different teaching. 1 Thessalonians 5:25.
Brethren, pray for us.
Okay, very simple. This is a pastor who's writing a local church in Thessalonica, and he says, pray for us. We're in ministry. We're doing a work for God. I need you to pray for me. That is true, and this, our system from a local church gives the best chance. And then, of course, spiritual support in practical ways, impact teams and support from for evangelism. That's a better chance if you're sent from a local church. The second thing is Dad set the pattern of financial support for work sent out from Prescott. From the beginning, my father did not want other people to go through what he went through. So when we planted people to another city, we pay the cost of relocation. We do not expect them to move themselves. It costs money to, rent a U-Haul or whatever it might be. So from the beginning, we have always paid the cost of relocation. That is the first part of financial support. Secondly, we provide equipment, tools. You cannot do the job without tools. Imagine if you were expecting someone to come paint your house and they have no brushes, rollers, sprayers, no equipment whatsoever, and then you say, but get the job done. That's not fair. So when we send workers out, we give them the tools, we give them sound equipment, music equipment as necessary. We give them projectors, screens, chairs, whatever is needed. Those are simply tools. And I know that there will be churches that are watching this. Pastors, if you're going to plant churches, you need to give your workers the tools to get the job done. Okay? And I will clarify that. I'm not asking you to support at a Prescott level in every case, but you can't plant if you're not going to support. Then there can be salary support. Unless the person is literally transferring their job or they have an ability to work from home, we give them salary support. In the early days, workers were sent out on a cutback system. I was actually, to my knowledge, I was one of the last to be sent out. Pastor Mitchell started this in early days. Of course, the people who were sent out were hippies that didn't have much. When Lisa and I were sent out, packing didn't take a long time, believe me. And so we were sent out on the cutback system. What that meant was we were sent out on the whopping salary of $275 a week. Every 90 days, our salary dropped 25%. Okay? So it got us going. I want to tell you, when you know that the 90-day mark is coming, that'll give you a motivation to witness. You need to come to church because I got to eat. So that was, we had no children, of course. That was possible. We did it. We made it. And but nonetheless, that was the original system. So now when we send out a worker, we send them out, and every situation is different. But at the least, we supply salary that can be temporary until they get a job. That's one version. The second version, sometimes we send workers and we see how it goes. There are some people, they are go-getters. They are absolutely on it. And we have continued to support them until it goes beyond just a temporary situation, until they are able to cover their own expenses. And, so there's various different versions. But nonetheless, we are going to make sure that they can eat and pay their rent, whatever it takes, to get that work off the ground. They need to have a place to meet. It's fine. Many churches will attempt to have someone build a church first, try to get people in a Bible study in your house. That, of course, will depend on the situation that they're living in. Then in different places, we rent halls, whether that is a community center, a hotel room, whatever, a temporary place to meet that can be, that's very helpful if you're going to a larger city, where people are going to a larger city, they don't know. Many times you don't realize this place looks good, this is the hood where no one will come. And so it's helpful for them in a larger city. Rent temporarily some place to meet. Then once you have it worked out, and also once you have demonstrated you can get some people, then we can look at getting you a building. But then ultimately, if you're going to plant churches, a building is a tool. They ultimately have a place to meet. And so that means that we put up the money for a place. We guarantee their rent, that we don't want to. It's not a testimony. I will not let one of our workers burn an unsaved person in a lease. I've had people sign foolish leases. I've had people go belly up and do bad things. We will never violate a sinner. That's a bad testimony. I'm a Christian. I can't do that. And so, but we guarantee their rent. Of course, buildings take various levels of renovations, depends on what kind of building they are, and every city is different in cost, but that's a tool. You have to give money on some level to be able to do that. We give help so that they can come to conference. When we have conference, we fund. If they can't pay, we will help them get to conference. Obviously, that should not last forever, but they do. We give ongoing support for outreaches. We pay the expenses before they have converts and are taking in income. We are paying the expenses. You're going to do a film outreach, a concert, whatever it might be. We will pay the printing. We will pay whatever costs are involved. Revivals. We will send. Revivals are very expensive to fly someone in, put them up, feed them, pay their salary for the time that they're preaching. We guarantee that. We supply that. Okay. Now, there is a balance to this, all right? And I want to give two balances because there are people all over the world watching that. Again, I stress, if you're from a tiny church, I am not expecting you to support at exactly the same level that Prescott does, but the principle is there. You better support. And it is not right if you want to plant churches, but you don't want to give financial support. The other is our workers, we expect them to take responsibility. Is we do support, it's not a blank check. So we're not going to give everything they ask for. All right? There are requests that are just outrageous. It's just too expensive, or it doesn't warrant it at this point in time. That is true. And then there is also the balance. Let me say it to any pioneer that is watching this. If you want to grow as a man of God, you've got to take financial responsibility. If you've been out for years and you're still asking for money from mama, you're not growing. No man of God has ever grown until they challenge people, they build in faith. So those are balances, but at the end of the day, we believe if you plant churches, what we do is very expensive. Okay, there's a reason why not everybody in the world is planting churches, and one of them is expense, it's cost. So but we're willing to do that. The third thing is Dad set the pattern of support for missionaries. I told you it's very common in many denominations. I think I'm under the impression that Foursquare kind of had a hybrid. They wanted you to raise some money and they would give some on their own. What this means is that missionaries who are called to preach and build a church actually have to be away from their church for long periods of time to raise money to support their work for the next 2 years. And I have heard horror stories. They don't have a choice because there's not guaranteed financial support. They have to leave their church for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, traveling around to different churches, often people that you don't know. I'm showing you pictures and photos, and now it's videos of my work back. Would you be willing to give? But meanwhile, their church is unattended. And I've heard horror stories of missionaries when they're overseas in that setting. Meanwhile, someone steals the whole thing by the time they get back. That's not workable. That's not a good pattern. So, in our fellowship, on Thursday nights is primarily when we announce international churches or mission churches. When we announce someone to go overseas, we supply the money for them to go. We're not asking them to raise the money. We raise the money partly on Thursday night. That's the Thursday night offering. We're going to use that for these mission churches that we plant on Thursday night. Secondly, I've explained to you the principle of the tithe. Having other churches under you tithe gives you enough resources to support world evangelism. And so this is something that is crucial. I went in 2004. I went, and I'll probably tell you in more detail in a later lesson, but I went to the nation of Turkey. I was thinking that God may want me to go to pioneer a church in Turkey, and so I went and traveled around. In Turkey, I met a man. He's actually the only man in Turkey who has been able to register an evangelical or a Christian church. It's illegal, but he was able to do it. He was from Spain. Very interesting man, good heart, building a work for God there. I have no idea what denominational flavor he was, but he was from Spain, and he told me when he went, 3 churches said, yes, brother, it's God for you to go to Spain, and we will support you. He said he moved his family to Turkey. I think this is in Ankara, in Turkey, began building a work, and then one day he gets a call and said, brother, we're not doing that anymore. We're not sending you any more money, and left him stranded in Turkey. So he said he had to get a job and work, and then he has been on his own. That's not an uncommon story. That's wrong. When my father began to plant missionaries, starting with Ron and Susie Burrell in Perth, West Australia, is when we did that, and now, of course, many, many hundreds and hundreds of workers that we've sent personally. That means my father made a commitment. If we are standing somebody up and announcing them to go overseas, we are going to give the money to send them, whatever it costs, to move your goods, if that's what it takes. In some cases, that's not workable. You got to buy furniture when you get there. We'll do that. That's fine. We'll pay the airfares. We'll pay whatever it takes to get you there. We will give you money to get housing when you arrive. We will give you money to buy equipment. We will supply money for salary and living expenses. And my father's reasoning was, if you're called to preach, he wanted them to focus on preaching. If you're called to evangelize and win people to Jesus, that is what he wanted them to do. He didn't want them to be distracted by, oh my God, the deadline's coming up. I got to go back home and raise money. We'll worry about the money. You build a work for God. And then when we send missionaries out, that means every 2 years, we will bring you home. We will pay the airfares. We'll give you money while you're here so that you can attend conference and be refreshed. And then whatever happens when you are finished, whether the job is finished or whether, someone gets sick or there's a problem, when you leave, we will give you the money to get home. We pay the airfares, we give them moving expenses, we give them money to resettle and set up their lives again. It is very expensive. But my father made a commitment. He said, that is what it takes to reach the world in missions. I want to tell you, that costs a lot of money, but giving support brings blessings to the local church. Think about some of the blessings of the fact that we support our workers. Number one, it gives confidence to workers. I know of churches where the pastor would not support, and then he is eager. You need to go overseas, and they're like, fat chance. There is no way, because they know that they're not going to get support. One of the things that happens is it gives confidence. People are willing to go if they know they're going to be taken care of. That's a benefit that enables us to continue to plant churches. Number two, it gives confidence to the church. We have sent your family in some cases. We've sent your friends. It helps. You know these people. You're going to be talking to them. It gives you confidence. When I'm standing up and raising money for them, you know that your friends and your family are receiving support. That is something, again, pastors that are watching, This is something that hurts pastors who are trying to plant churches, but you are cheap and you're shorting your workers, and you can't understand why you're struggling to raise money. It's because in the church you're hurting the confidence factor. So by supporting, it gives confidence. That's one of the things. We don't do scams here. If we announce we're sending a worker, we do it, number one, and we pay for it. And so that gives confidence overall. The third thing, support brings the blessing of God. If we give out, the Bible principle is God will give back. He makes sure of it. Luke 6, verse 38.
Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you.
Okay, this is a Bible principle. Giving out causes it to come back. And I can tell you in the Prescott Church, we have seen that for decades. It has not hurt us to be liberal. It has helped us because God makes sure there is miracle supply. The fourth thing, and this is very powerful, I want to make sure that I emphasize it. By us giving support, both spiritual and financial, that means every single person in the church gets to participate in the work of God. Okay. How many of you have prayed for one of our workers who are out on the field? Have you prayed for them? Okay. So biblically, the Bible says you are a part of anything that happens. There are workers. They're having church this morning. Whatever happens in their church, you have a part in that. Some of you will never be behind the pulpit. That's okay. You have a part because you support by prayer, financial support. Think about this. Philippians 4, 16 and 17.
For even in Thessalonica you sent aid once and again for my necessities. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that abounds to your account. Okay, Paul is asking, he is planting a church in another nation, and he says, I'm asking you for money, but he says, I'm not just asking you for a gift. I'm not just asking you for money. I'm asking for fruit that abounds to your account. He says, if you give finances that enable me to preach the gospel and people get saved and lives get changed and disciples are made and churches are planted, he said, that abounds to your account. Some of you here, I pray that God will give you this idea. What we are part of is genius. There is not a single person here. How many of you here, you have given in one of our pledges or conference offerings? You've given that. Okay. Every single one of you have a part in what God is doing around the world. Some of you have never even left Arizona. It doesn't matter. Your life is now reaching Africa and Asia, and you're everywhere around the world. You become a part of it. It's not just a pin on a map. The Bible says people that get saved this morning in Florida and Idaho, wherever we have churches that we have helped support, the Bible says God is crediting it. You have a part. That is why I'm praying you catch this in our memorial stones. We are reaching the world together. It is brilliant. My father was a very, very smart man. God led him into this, but we all reap the benefit of what God is doing. When Lisa and I were in South Africa, we used to get letters from Jay Mayotte. Jay's son Bob is here, some of the grandsons, Ryan, the different ones are here, Phil. Is Jay Mayotte, her husband never got saved till near the end of his life, faithful saint all these years, but she would write, many of the missionaries said they got letters from Jay Mayotte, and she would often include a line. She would say, thank you for going where I cannot go. But Jay Mayotte had a part in everything that God did in our work in South Africa and around the world. Even in her limited income, she gave for the work of God. She prayed for missionaries. And so the Bible says the principle of support means we all get to be a part
of what God is doing. Let's talk then, secondly, let's talk about international church planting tensions. I'm telling you the story and I'm building the case. We're on the second to last step now of why we are no longer with the Foursquare Church. We began to plant churches internationally now. We had churches in Mexico. Nogales and Agua Prieta were supernatural. I've told you the stories of how they came about. Holland, supernaturally how that came about. But starting in 1978, when we sent Ron and Susie Burrell to Perth, West Australia, that's 45 years ago next month, now everything changed. Now we were planting deliberately in other nations, and once Prescott started doing it, it opened up the world. We initially had 3 conferences, Prescott, Tucson, Flagstaff, and now all 3 of those, and even Perth started to, we started planting internationally, not just close by, not just within the nation that we were a part of or the church was located in, but we did it overseas. But I want you to understand, here was the next thing that happened. Now, international church planting caused tension, new and growing tensions with Foursquare. I'm telling you over and over again, a denomination is common beliefs marked by centralized control. So when you plant churches in other nations, in an organization, now we're talking about Foursquare, their denomination, it is centralized. They have a missions board. The central missions board, first of all, they decide, not the pastor, not the people who know them. The board decides who goes and does not go overseas and where they go overseas. But the second thing, the support is centralized. Churches would raise or give voluntarily missions offerings that would be sent to headquarters. That's a godly principle. I have no problem with that. But the problem was support for missionaries was completely centralized. Headquarters distributed the money. And again, you're talking about the people distributing the money out were people who maybe didn't even know these people. It's their job to do it. They're doing it. I'm sure they're doing it out of good heart. Okay. When we initially started planting internationally through Foursquare. So that meant that Foursquare okayed that we send the couple. We would send the money to headquarters. Headquarters would pass the money on. That's not workable. Here's the problem with that system. The needs of missionaries are in real time. But the money is distributed in board time. And those are 2 very different things. You understand how it works with a board? Yeah. Hello, I got a crisis. The car broke down. Something happened. The equipment was stolen. Whatever it is, we need money. Okay, at our meeting next month, we'll discuss that. That's how a board works. Okay, I'm not saying that's evil. That's just how it is. That's not workable. The problem is people have needs. They're in real time. I need money, and it's like today, right now. This has to be okayed, and so it just takes time. I'm told of a story. I don't have personal experience with this, but I am told that in the early days we had a mission church that were meeting in a tent, and a storm came and damaged the tent, so they had nowhere to meet. And so they requested money, put in a request to the board, we need to replace the tent so that they have a place to have church. And so, but there was a lengthy delay. We got to meet at our next meeting. We'll talk about it, discuss it, approve it, organize it, finally send it. But the church has no place to meet. So my father just said, that's not going to work. We can't keep planting churches with centralized control. That's just not going to. And then, of course, part of the problem is you get people, they are put in positions for various reasons. That's a problem if the person in charge of the money is not liberal. Okay, my father was in charge of church planting. My father was a liberal. He was personally liberal. He was liberal to people. He was liberal to the church. He was liberal to workers. He's famed for being a liberal man. But if you had somebody in charge of money, remember the story I told you? In Perth, I was a delegate at Foursquare Convention where a guy was having a fit over the missionary in Papua New Guinea. He spent $19 or whatever it was on pencils in the last year. We're not going to reach the world with a heart like that. If you're worried about $19 worth of pencils, if I showed you some of the expenses we got to put out in an average month, you'd have a heart attack. Okay? So what we began to do, all of the conference churches, we began planting churches outside of denominational control. We are a part of Foursquare, but what we began doing is we started planting churches internationally without permission. We didn't ask, is it okay with you if we plant? We just did it. And then secondly, we bypassed the board system. We sent the money direct. We raised the money, so we sent it to them directly. Okay, that caused tension, because that actually is a threat to the denomination. Okay, what you're doing is you're saying then the denomination is not necessary. So I'm showing you the trail. This is the second to last step. I told you, by not having Bible schools, our pastors do not go to Bible schools, they're trained in-house. That was tension number one. Planting churches and them succeeding who hadn't gone to Bible school, that was step number two. Territorial tensions. Number three, we don't have women pastors. Number four, the 1978 convention when my father spoke boldly. That was number five. And then international church planting. This is causing increasing tensions. Foursquare were not happy with the way that we were operating. Let's talk finally about spreading impact. So now, starting in 1978, we began sending workers to other nations. Prescott, in connection with Nogales, we partnered to plant the first church into Spain. In 1976, the first Foursquare church was began. We didn't begin it, obviously, however it came about through them. They started a church in Madrid, Spain. A man named Jose Aguilar, he worked at a factory, and some of the workers in the factory, they were from an area of Madrid. This is within Metro Madrid, called Fuenlabrada. One of those was a man named Julio Moraleja. Julio had been a communist. He got very, very sick. They prayed for him, and he was instantly healed. And so in 1978, Jose Aguilar started doing services in houses in this area called Fuenlabrada, and they wound up having about 50 people. In 1982, the Foursquare supervisor met my father, Pastor Wayman Mitchell, at a convention, and he said, we have 50 people, and they don't have a pastor in this area called Fuenlabrada in Madrid, Spain. He said, do you have a young pastor for them? And so we partnered. We didn't have Spanish-speaking workers for that. We partnered. There was a man named Bill Walworth out of Nogales. And so we supplied the money. Nogales supplied the worker in June 1982. Show the picture here. This just shows a map of Madrid. And you see there the red dot. That is Fuenlabrada. And this was our first work. Later on, Sergio Gaiola, who's the brother of our current leader, Jose Luis Gaiola, he took over that church. We have some photos from the first church in Spain. God began to do a good work, and this is that church in Fuenlabrada. I think there's a second one. More photos of the church there began in the far right-hand corner. That is Sergio Gaiola. Next photos, they're doing now. Go to the next photo. And here they are doing exactly what we would do in Prescott, what we did in Nogales. They began to repeat this, street outreaches and evangelism, and God began to build a work in Spain. I think that's the last one. Then the second part of international church planting, Australia. planted the first worker into Germany. Henry and Heidi Lickel were sent. We have some photos there of the Lickels. They went to a place called Offenbach, and this is not far from Frankfurt, but this is where they went. Henry and Heidi had moved to Australia. They were German, but God got a hold of their heart. 1982, Pastor Mitchell sent them to Offenbach in Germany. And the next photo, and again here, that's the Lickels. He has since gone on to be with the Lord. But here is the early days of the church and building a work in Offenbach. Next photo, and again, they were doing, now Henry did exactly what he saw in Perth. And in Perth, they did exactly what they saw in Prescott. Here they are in Offenbach, street outreach, dramas on the street, preaching the gospel. That was the first work we had in Germany. Tucson sent the first work into Canada, into North Bay, and later Vancouver, Canada. I have some photos of Canada. Here is, I think that's actually still Germany. There was one more German picture. Next one, move on here. This is where North Bay is located, up above Toronto and Ottawa. And this couple was sent there. I think it was originally the Pensingers went there. And then next photo, we see here are the Beauregards, the man in the blue suit at the front, his wife next to him, Larry and Susan Beauregard. They were sent to Vancouver in British Columbia. And what was very interesting is as he went and began to outreach on the streets, he met a man on the streets. He saw a man who was boldly street preaching. His name was Dave Marks. And so he saw him, began to meet him. First of all, we got some photos of outreach, and this is actually Vancouver, very beautiful city that we have there. Next photo in Vancouver. This is the early days of the church in Vancouver. And the next photo here is street outreach. They're doing here a drama. They're street preaching on the street, and that is in downtown Vancouver. And the next one, I think one more here, is you'll see there holding a trombone this street preacher he met named Dave Marks. Dave Marks was saved in the Assembly of God. And remember I told you back when we were talking about the Jesus movement, how this actually was not just America, it was moving all through. Where Dave was living in Chilliwack, Canada, the Jesus movement began to come. Dave was witnessing on the street, and hippies started getting saved. They're very responsive, exactly what was happening in America, but a little bit delayed. So he was so excited, he started bringing, isn't that what we want? We want sinners. He started bringing hippies to church, and as happened in many churches around the world, they said, we don't want those dirty people here. And so Dave, that spun him out, but he had a good heart. He just determined, I am going to evangelize. I'm going to street preach regardless. I'm going to keep my heart right. Larry Beauregard met him street preaching on the street, saw that he had a fire to see people saved. He would go actually travel hour and a half into Vancouver from where he lived in Chilliwack, and would street preach in that city, trying to make impact. He wanted to see Canada reached. And so ultimately he was invited to come down to a conference, met my father, and was sent back. We said, that is exactly what we want to do. So we planted Dave and Sherry Marks to open a church into Chilliwack, British Columbia. I have some photos. Here's Chilliwack, beautiful in this nice farming valley. I think they call it the Fraser Valley. Next photo is here you see concert, band outreach. He saw this in American churches, began reproducing it. Here they are in a baptism in a local pond, it looks like. Next photo, here's early days. That's in 1986. They started in 1985. And here's early days of the church. These were some of our first works in Canada. Then later on is in Toronto. The Webbs went. Next photo here is Toronto. They got beautiful cities in Canada. there. But move on to the photos. Here is the Webbs went, and they went and pioneered a church in Toronto, Canada. There's a baptism on the left. That's kind of a grand opening in a basketball gym, probably in a school, and began to build. Now that's on the east coast of Canada. Next photo. There's more photos. Early days of the church up on the left. That's early days of the church. On the right, this is in later days. You'll see there's my father standing on stage. I think is that Dad? I can't see from here. I'm getting old, you know. But this is later on, in later years, building a work in Canada. Australia sent a work into the Philippines in a place called Baguio City. Then they sent a worker into Auckland. New Zealand, I have a photo of Auckland, and very, very beautiful city there, but God began to build a work there. Prescott, we sent a worker into Okinawa. This is the first church into Japan, and we have a photo there. It shows you down there where Okinawa is in the lower part of Japan. So my point in telling you this is we started spreading throughout the world. The vision that worked in Prescott, it first worked in local cities around here, then in New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, California. Then we began to spread throughout the United States. My point is we started spreading around the church, the world. Discipleship is the releasing of workers into the harvest field. You train workers in-house. The only reason why you're training them is to release them. And we began to do that all over the world. The indigenous principle that I've talked about a number of times, indigenous means from within. When you plant churches and from within they get converts, make disciples, they raise money and send workers, they have a multiplying effect. You start getting exponential growth. It's no longer just us adding 1, 2, 3. Now you're having others add at the same time. It multiplies. Genesis 9, verse 7.
And as for you, be fruitful and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it.
Okay, multiply. That is God's plan. This is what began to happen. Here they'll put up on the screen. By 1985, we had 250 fellowship churches. We only started planting in 1973, and now 12 years later, through the multiplying power, we had 250 fellowship churches, plus then we had 2 men who came in. They were not really a part of us, but they affiliated. They were Praise Chapel, New Harvest. In 1985, there were 45 in New Harvest, 25 in Praise Chapel. So my point, we were multiplying. We were reaching the world. I show you 2 final photos before we close. My father's Bible that I've been showing you here. I want you to look at this. This is Proverbs 16:3, is it? Commit your works unto the Lord. Your thoughts will be established. Thoughts are plans. And then verse 9, a man's heart devises his way, but the Lord directs his step. My father made a note in his Bible, December 20, 1983. He's talking about future ministry. And God began to speak about what he was going to do, and now we're seeing the fulfillment. Final photo from my father's Bible. Look at this verse that he marked here. This is Isaiah 29:14. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. I am telling you, what God has done in our fellowship is marvelous. It is awesome to see that in a short time it began to multiply. It's a work of God and not of man. And I believe that that scripture is being fulfilled even to this day. It's a marvelous work. Thank God. We'll stop there. God bless you. Service will start at 10:30.
Service will start in 10 minutes. Thanks for coming.